Hello, everyone. Okay, enough of the music. Hi, all. I am Kelly. This is Sophie. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Kelly.
And the broads are back. For
Forever.
tonight, anyway. So, everyone out there in internet land, we thought it would be fun if two broads talking politics kind of looked at what just happened with the midterm elections. Spoiler, I'm pretty happy. What could maybe be better, where we want to go from here, and just kind of do a little recap and look forward, and then you tell us if you'd like to see broads more in the world or what we might do going forward. So, Sophie, let's start with what were your feelings going into election night? How were you feeling? I know how I was feeling. How were you feeling?
I felt really, I felt really uncertain. I felt prepared for the worst,
Mm-hmm.
but I also felt like weirdly optimistic, which I got nervous because I feeling optimistic is not always a good thing.
Yeah.
And I got, I feel like everybody's still kind of like traumatized from 2016, but I felt like I felt good about it, and I didn't know why I felt good about it, and that made me really nervous. I know that the polling had been, longtime listeners will remember, I am a very big fan of political sort of statistics and
Yes.
sort of the 538 model of predicting. So I even went to see Nate Silver a couple of weeks ago when he came here.
Oh, wow.
So I am a really big fan of following polls and models, and I felt like the polls and the models did not agree.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what that meant. But I knew that they had not agreed necessarily in 2020 either, or in 2016. And so it felt like it was kind of anybody's ball. How about you?
I was convinced that everything was going to end, the world would be over. I so I always had at least a hope that we would hold the Senate, and that was kind of the, like, if we can just hold the Senate, we can stave off the worst. Um, but I thought we were going to get crushed in the House, and what I was particularly concerned about was state legislatures and like attorney general and secretary of state elections, because I just felt like I wasn't hearing that many people talk about them, and I thought that meant nobody was paying attention. I was wrong, clearly, but I was pretty worried. So I'm glad I was wrong. So did you I know from previous experience of being with you on election night that sometimes the initial results are a little bit terrifying. Did you like follow it in lifetime on election night? Like, how are you following along?
So I was lucky in that because Wisconsin is in Central Time, and because I'm an election official here in Madison, I was actually super busy when the first results came in.
The Florida results.
And I remember I did stop because usually at the end of the shift it goes down, right? We have like a big rush after everybody's out of work,
Mhm.
work, and then usually towards the end there's hardly anyone there. So I did get to check my phone in the back real quickly, and I did see on social media that people were talking about Florida, and I remember just thinking like, Miami-Dade has not been ours in a long time, so I'm not that worried about it. Like, why are people still talking about Miami-Dade? Like I don't
Didn't they learn from 2016 and 2018 and 2020?
like every time people would go, "Oh, this is so bad in Miami-Dade," and I would say, "It's exactly like it's been for like a while." I mean,
Yeah.
so I wasn't that alarmed by it. Florida, I wasn't that alarmed by Florida. I was a little alarmed by New York, but then other things like Michigan started coming in and Pennsylvania was looking good, and then I felt really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think working the polls, a little plug there. If anybody wants to work the polls, it's a great way to spend election day because you don't have time to be checking social media and trying to figure out, what's going on because you're in it. And so, highly recommend for distraction purposes. How about you?
Also, because it's like good for, democracy.
Democracy, but mostly because it'll keep you from going crazy.
Yeah, I actually managed to not look at anything until 9:30 Central. So I have been trying to be on Twitter less for obvious reasons, and was on Mastodon. And Mastodon has this great feature where they don't really want people talking about politics, so people hide it under a content warning. Like you can talk about it, but it's hidden under a content warning. And so I could decide if I wanted to expand them or not and see anything. And so I would go to Mastodon. I wouldn't go to Facebook. I wouldn't go to Twitter. Wouldn't check my email, like nothing, until 9:30. Finally, I was like, I can't hold out. I have to look. But by that point, like good stuff was starting to happen. So I got through it okay. But I was, pretty terrified up until those good things. So let's talk about the good things then. Like, what are the things that were most exciting to you about what happened in this midterm? There's a ton we could talk about, but what were the particular things that were sort of really exciting for you?
I mean, obviously holding the Senate was really important. Personally, I really liked winning in Pennsylvania. That's, I lived in Pennsylvania when I was a kid, and I have friends in Pennsylvania, and I care very much about Pennsylvania. And I like John Fetterman, and I also took very personally the attacks on John Fetterman as a person who's had loved ones who had strokes.
Mhm.
It was like personally offensive to me the way that people were portraying him as, because he was disabled from a stroke, as being unable to do a job. So I was really excited when he won. I was obviously, as a person who lives in Wisconsin, really excited that we kept Tony Evers and we did stop our state Republican Party from having a supermajority, which was important. Let's see. And I guess I was pretty happy, really, with Senate results across the country. I wish we could have come closer in Florida, but I did not expect that we would. And I had never had any expectation of that. So I was pretty happy with all of those. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, in the Senate, I think particularly Catherine Cortez Masto winning was huge. It was not a sure thing, and I was really, really, really happy to see her win. And she's great too. Of course, seeing Fetterman win was terrific. For me, it was the state legislatures. I had just expected not just to lose the House, but that we would also, if not have any state legislatures flip red, that they would at least not flip blue like I was hoping they would. And in fact, we flipped a bunch blue. I mean, that is unheard of for a midterm in the first term of a president, that his party gains state legislatures like that. That is unreal. And that, I think, is what is going to, so it wasn't just about sort of the results this time, which of course are important in all sorts of ways, but that it felt like we're doing things in a sustainable way moving forward. Like I had always been worried that 2018 was a blip, that we were gonna, like, it was this great time, we flipped a bunch of stuff, but then people were going to disengage. And then it was clear people stayed engaged for 2020, but Trump was on the ballot. So I was like, okay, but are people going to stay involved? And frankly, I disengaged a little bit, like I felt bad about it. I knew I was doing it, but I just like couldn't be in it as much. And I was afraid that everyone else was doing the same thing, was also disengaging. And so the fact that there were so many people still out there working so hard to be able to flip state legislatures blue in Michigan, I think, did Pennsylvania flip both? One of the houses, at least, or that, I don't remember if it was the House or the Senate in Pennsylvania, but at least one of them flipped. Minnesota, like all over the place, did much better than I was expecting in state legislatures, and I think that is so, so, so important for the future of the country.
Is there anything that you were disappointed about?
Yeah, I mean, look, as much as I never expect anything out of Florida, I'm still disappointed that it's quite as red as it is right now. So that I think, was a disappointment. Um, the fact that Stacey Abrams wasn't more competitive, I didn't necessarily think she was going to win, but I was really hoping she would at least come close. That I think was disappointing. And uh Mandela Barnes, I mean, that's probably the one that hurts the most because, as much as I would love to see Tim Ryan win, I didn't really expect it would happen in Ohio, but I thought that Mandela Barnes had a chance in Wisconsin. Clearly, Tony Evers won, so it was possible. And Barnes is just so great. I really, really would have liked to have seen him in the Senate.
Yeah, me too. I was really disappointed about that. It was very frustrating, especially since it's hard to argue that racism didn't play a part there. And really disappointing as a Wisconsinite to see. I mean, I actually saw with my own eyes ballots where people voted for Tony Evers and Ron Johnson, and I was like, "What world are you living in? Like, what?" But
There was a lot of split ticket voting across the country. It was bizarre.
very strange. And I'm so glad we have Tony, but I was really sad because Mandela Barnes is a great talent, and I hope he'll be back in Wisconsin politics. And I was really disappointed in Ohio. Actually, I think that the DCC really kind of abandoned that race earlier than they should have. Tim Ryan is the best shot you're going to get in Ohio in a generation. He is a great leader. I mean, he was able to keep a ancestrally conservative. It was a Democratic, but it was an ancestrally conservative Democratic House seat for many, many years. I mean, Youngstown is not a progressive place. It was always a blue dog Democrat kind of place. And he was able not only to do that, but to come out as pro-choice in a place where that is heavily Catholic, where when you drive around Youngstown, there are huge anti-abortion billboards everywhere. And he was able to come out as pro-choice during one of his campaigns and maintain the seat for many, many years. So he is a really great politician, and I was really disappointed that they did not back him up. And similarly, with the 3rd district, Wisconsin, 3rd, we could have had that seat. There was a insurrectionist running there who did end up winning by a very small margin. And if we had just funded Brad Pfaff better, we could have had that seat. So I was very disappointed that we didn't win that.
Yeah, and I think the obviously Sherrod Brown's going to get more support than Tim Ryan did, but it is worrisome that Ohio is, as much as I want to continue to think of it as a purple state, is not voting in a very purpley way lately, and I worry a lot about Sherrod Brown in 2024.
Yes.
I mean, I think it has to be said, the other disappointment is just New York. Like, I don't know what's going on there. It's if you want to talk about Dems in disarray, like the New York Democratic Party, that is clearly Dems in disarray. The number of incumbents in the House who were up against each other in primaries was a mess, and then clearly we lost a bunch of House seats there because of just bad maps. So, I worry about what that means for the future of New York State a little bit too.
Yeah, same. Although I do remember covering a similar race as a journalist in Poughkeepsie during college, where it was kind of a wave election. And I remember covering it and going to the Republican Party where they were all celebrating, and then going to the Democratic Party where they were all sad, and being like, how could this happen in New York State? But New York is one of the states where, like, Wisconsin and Illinois and so many other states, where you have, most of the state being very red, and then the places where people actually live being very blue. So that's a trick. We're gonna have to figure that out.
Yeah. So I started to talk about 2024 a little bit. Let's talk about the Senate map in 2024 because, ooh, it is not pretty.
No.
So if you're watching and you haven't looked yet, I'm sorry to ruin your night, but um, to hold the Senate, we need to hold Senate seats in Ohio, which is doable. Sherrod Brown is fantastic, but still, it's Ohio. Montana, which is in West Virginia. When your big hope is Joe Manchin, like that just hurts.
Yet Joe Manchin has spent a lot of time pissing us off for a good reason.
Yeah.
And he won in 2018. I mean, in a year where the midterms were very about Trump.
Yeah.
It's
possible.
I think he's got a healthy chance. Joe Manchin does what he does because he knows West Virginia and he knows what people are looking for. And I if I had to have faith in any one person, I would have faith in Joe Manchin.
Oh God, that hurts.
It's terrifying. But
yeah, and I think if people need good incentive to help in the Georgia runoff, first of all, we need that seat for 6 years because in 2 years it's going to hurt. But also that gives Joe Manchin cover to continue to vote against things that aren't popular with West Virginia so that he can remain elected.
Yep, agreed.
And we should not count on flipping any seats in 2024 because the best chances to flip, the best chances are Florida and Texas.
Florida, I just don't know about Florida. I think the thing that's happening with Florida now is, again, a lot of there's a weird generational strip of people that are big Trump supporters between 45 and 65. And a bunch of those people just started retiring and moving to Florida. And I think that is going to continue to have an electoral impact for a really long time. Texas is interesting. I think Texas, we actually have a better chance at. I think Texas has a lot going on, but I think especially with all of Texas has a pretty good sized young population and has some pretty good, fast growing, large metropolitan centers. So I think that Texas is somewhere where Beto didn't win this time around, but he did a lot of good groundwork the past, 6 years, and he's been working really hard, and I think that's going to pay off. In the same way that a lot of the work that groups associated with Stacey Abrams and others in Georgia, their work paid off for us in 2 Senate seats. So.
Yeah. And it's the Texas seat is against Cruz, right? So that always helps because people don't like Ted Cruz.
I don't even think Ted Cruz likes Ted Cruz, honestly.
Yeah. I think the Florida and Texas thing, though, does highlight, you'll remember, I'm sure, that after the 2012 election, the Republicans did this postmortem. And one of the things they decided was that they needed to do better with Latino voters. And for all that they didn't listen to the rest of their postmortem, they have been doing better and better with Latino voters. I think that the Democrats need to have a postmortem now where they say, we are not doing well with Latino voters and we are taking them for granted and we need to turn that around.
I definitely think that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party tend to treat Latino voters as a monolith, but they don't realize that there's a huge difference between, someone who moved here and was naturalized from, Ecuador, naturalized 5 years ago, and someone whose great grandparents fled Cuba after the Cuban Revolution. Those are 2 very different groups of people, and the educational and generational divides that we see going on in the larger population are also happening in the Latino population. And I think that is something that we're going to have to kind of wrestle with, that we can't treat Latino as kind of a monolith. There's so many different cultural things going on there, that we can't pretend like all Latinos are going to vote the same way, which I feel like the Democrats and the Republicans have been doing for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is, Florida's going to Florida, but I think that's the key to Texas is
Mm-hmm.
we had this idea forever that like eventually just demographics were going to tip Texas, and that's not going to happen if we're not better about being really intentional about outreach to Latino voters, about serving their needs. Like it's just we can't take that group for granted.
Yeah, I do think one really exciting lesson of 2022 has been, I think we are doing something right with some of the youth outreach. I think we've seen really high engagement from younger groups now, and that's something we want to continue building on for 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly the downfall of Roe helped turn out the youth vote for sure. But yeah, I think that's really great. I think Biden had a bunch of TikTok influencers or something to the White House a month or two ago, and I think that's great. That's really good that they're finally figuring out that that is a group, especially when you have somebody who literally just turned 80 as the head of your party. Like you need to be pretty deliberate about talking to youth voters. All right. Do we want to speculate at all on what might happen in the presidential election?
I just don't even know. I just don't even know. I don't even know what I want to happen.
I know.
Like I feel like I couldn't have predicted 2020 2 years before it happened, and I can't predict now. So I'm
Yeah.
not gonna try. I'm still thinking Georgia, working on Georgia stuff, and then Wisconsin is going to have a very consequential Supreme Court election this spring. So if anybody in Wisconsin or anybody in Illinois wants to come and help out, it's going to be really important. And it's going to affect everyone because the Wisconsin State Supreme Court basically controls our election system, and makes really big changes to it on a whim. And whether we are able to hold Tammy Baldwin's Senate seat, and hold the current congressional seats that we have depend very much on the composition of the court.
Yeah, do not sleep on 2023. There's going to be some big stuff. So, obviously, that in Wisconsin, there's mayoral elections in Chicago, and all 50 aldermanic seats are also up in Chicago. There's no chance of like a Trumpy takeover or something, but there is definitely a chance that we could make real progress and elect actual progressives to the mayorship, which is not what we have right now, and get more progressives. They're a growing coalition on the city council, but it'd be great to get an even bigger coalition. Cities are a place where you can make real change in a number of ways, but including in things like environmental concerns. So it's really important to pay attention to these city elections. Shout out to Karen Bass for winning in LA. I was so excited to see that one. And there will also, of course, be elections in Virginia because they have these weird off-year state legislative elections. And that will be super consequential since they have a terrible, terrible governor now in Virginia. All right. So what should people do right now to get involved in Georgia and beyond?
Well, donating is always good. I think contacting the campaign and asking how you can help is always good. I know that some campaigns will want people on the ground. Some campaigns are going to want people to write postcards or do text bank, phone bank. But I think that we have the momentum in the Georgia race, and I think if we keep up the pressure, we can win the seat for 6 years. So I'm going to recommend that, and also, like you said, not sleeping on 2023 because there are going to be some really important races.
Yeah.
Even if it's a quote unquote off year.
Yeah, and as always, remember that elections are not the only way to get involved. And I think we're seeing increasingly the importance of school boards around the country. I happen to live in a place where school boards are appointed and not elected. The rest of you probably all live somewhere where school boards are elected. Even if you're not on the school board, you can show up at meetings, voice support for, actually reading books and not hiding them from kids. All sorts of other consequential things that happen in schools. You can get involved in all of those ways. And then, of course, there are organizations that do work year round, year in and year out, regardless of whether there's elections happening. Moms Demand Action is about to celebrate their 10-year anniversary. And given that gun violence is clearly not going anywhere in this country, that's a great way to get involved too.
I also recommend National Network for Abortion Funds. They help raise money to pay for people to get to where they need to go to get abortions, especially if they're in a state where it's essentially outlawed, and to actually pay for the abortions themselves. So it's a really great organization made up of a bunch of local funds. You can donate to your local fund or you can donate to all the funds. So National Network for Abortion Funds, I recommend.
All right. Any other things we should give people as parting advice or hope? Or
I think we're doing a good job. Stay the course and don't forget to make activism part of your sort of everyday life.
Yeah, and activism is fun. It's fun. You should go do it. I also am going to just do a quick plug. I have 2 other podcasts. So if you really miss hearing my voice all the time, people should tune in. One of those is Unsung History, where I look at kind of history from the perspective of marginalized communities, essentially. So I'm looking at a lot of women's history, Black history, Native history, so all sorts of important things like that. And I recently did a 4-episode series on the history of abortion and reproduction in the United States that I think anyone listening to Two Broads Talking Politics would care a lot about. And I also do a podcast that I co-host with Lila Nordstrom, which is about activism and is about sort of how you become an activist and what you can do, called What Can I Do? And Lila Nordstrom, you may, if you're a longtime listener of Two Broads Talking Politics, may remember was a guest on Two Broads Talking Politics, talking about her a book she wrote where she was trying to she was advocating for people who had been affected by 9/11 as high schoolers. So she experienced 9/11 in high school, was right essentially across from the World Trade Center, and then they had all sorts of health outcomes after that. And so she was advocating on that behalf. And so she brings her advocacy experience to What Can I Do? So if you're looking for what to do, that's what you where you can find out. All right. So let us know what you'd like to hear from Two Broads. We certainly probably are not going to be able to come back to a 5 times a week kind of schedule anytime soon. But if you'd like to hear some live shows like this from us, I think we're open to it. So the Broads are back, baby. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.